The race for the White House is deadlocked, and with 2.5 weeks to go before Election Day, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are running out of time to win over undecided voters and dramatically alter the trajectory of what's becoming a more intense, aggressive, and sometimes bizarre contest. Joining me tonight to discuss this and more, Peter Baker, the chief White House correspondent at the New York Times. Francesca Chambers is a White House correspondent for USA Today. Susan Glasser is a staff writer at The New Yorker, and Vivian Salama is a political reporter for The Wall Street Journal. Susan, I want to ask a question about what the kids call the vibes. It feels like there's not a tsunami of excitement overwhelming us right now. Are we sleepwalking into this election?
You know, Frank, 8 years into the Trump era in American politics, we're still asking and not yet answering the same question. You know, is Donald Trump, who's broken every norm of American politics, of the American presidency, really going to be the first president in more than a century to be returned to power despite everything? And what's remarkable right now is that there is at least an even chance, if not better than an even chance of that happening. And yet, this vibe that you're talking about, you know, we've lost the summer of joy, it seems to me. We've moved way beyond that. Kamala Harris is no longer making fun of Donald Trump and saying he's weird.
Right.
She's saying he's a threat to democracy as we know it. And Trump has escalated his rhetoric in a way that seems determined to prove the point that she's making.
Yeah, just how do you account for that apathy?
You know, Trump fatigue, I guess, is a real thing. You know, we've been overwhelmed with a fugue of lies and misinformation and scandal and disinformation for so long. We all know people who've just tuned out of that until perhaps just now. Democrats, I have noticed a very marked shift just in the last couple of weeks, a dawning realization that a Trump second term is a true possibility. My question is this realization coming too late for them in the election cycle?
Vivian, I just want to double check what Susan said and get your sense, because clearly within Democratic circles, there's a lot of hand-wringing about the election, and implied in what she said, or what she actually said, is that Donald Trump has the upper hand right now headed into this last stretch of the election. Do you think that that's right?
I spoke to a top Trump official just before the show, actually, and he told me they're cautiously optimistic. At this point, they see the polls working in their favor to an extent. Obviously, it's it's anyone's race at this point, but he does have a slight advantage in most of the swing states at this point. They do feel that he's in a comfortable position, and that's reflected in the type of events that he's done just in the past week, but also in the coming week, where a lot of it is more sort of splashier, big media events and not necessarily directly targeted at a particular strategy. They're looking to just get him out there, get as many people as possible, and just amplify his shtick, if you will, without necessarily honing in on any particular groups. And that's where we are at this stage.
Wait, does anybody disagree with Trump having the upper hand right now, or do we all?
I'm
is there
not sure.
consensus?
Well, with all respect, I mean, I know the vibe is the vibe, but the truth is, like, it was a tie a month ago. It's a tie today.
Yeah.
And nature abhors a vacuum, and the political media class abhors a static story, but that's what we've got. We've got a static story. So we look for small changes in the polls. It's a point here, a point there, and we're trying to make large conclusions out of it. I think the honest truth is we don't know. We're not going to know for 2 more weeks. We might as well go to sleep for 2 weeks and wake up on Election Day, because that's when we'll start to really know. But the truth is, we're not changing anybody's mind at this point. People have made up their minds. There's a small number of people out there who may yet be winnable by Kamala Harris, who otherwise probably won't vote. They're not going to go to Trump. He's not gaining any voters. He's not losing any voters. It's all about whether she can get those small number of people who voted for Biden last time, not because they were Democrats, maybe, not because they liked Biden, maybe, but because they didn't like Trump. And she's out there now reminding them why they didn't like Trump in a sort of belated way, making that contrast the last part of her pitch to the audience.
Yeah, it would just I mean, you only look spry, but I think you're a gray beard. And just play the role of historian and compare this to where we sat in the races in 2016 and 2020. It feels different than those campaigns?
It does. Well, in 2016, obviously, Democrats were somewhat overconfident, right? They thought they had it in the bag. Everybody assumed, including the media, that Hillary Clinton was definitely going to win. Now, obviously, that last-minute intervention by James Comey on the emails changed the dynamics in the last few days. But there was clearly, you could argue, some complacency. They didn't necessarily know what was going to happen. And they didn't necessarily see Trump as the threat that today's Democrats do, right? They didn't necessarily see him as a threat to democracy. Today's Democrats have no doubt about that. In 2020, Biden had the upper hand most of the time. I think most people felt like he was probably going to hang on. He had a better lead going into the election day than he actually came out of election day. So there, too, maybe overestimating it. But today, we feel very different than either of those elections because it is tight as a tick.
Just how much you both covered, Susan, Peter, you both were in Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. You saw post-communist political life looked like. Anne Applebaum, Masha Gessen, they keep warning us about the apathy that emerges when a figure like Trump confronts us. Does it feel like we're repeating that type of cycle?
Listen, I would say this. If there's anybody in America who's not aware of the stakes at this moment of time, I think it's more the exhaustion than it is a lack of awareness, Frank. But I'll tell you, Peter and I lived through Vladimir Putin's rollback of Russian democracy 20 years ago, his first few years. And the time to defend democratic institutions is before they're taken away. And that's where I am stunned in particular. Look at the specificity with which Donald Trump has promised mass deportations, with which he and his advisors have said they would round up 1 million people and put them in camps. They've actually used that phrasing. And I remember in January of 2017, the absolute hysteria and shock that greeted Donald Trump's Muslim ban just on 7 countries.
Right.
What is it going to feel like in this country on the first weekend of the Trump presidency in January of next year, when people are being arrested and camps are being opened, and it's going to be a level of hysteria. I don't think that people have really processed how quickly this can happen and how dramatically the country's setup can be changed in a very short amount of time, especially if Republicans win all 3 branches of government.
Chilling. So, Francesca, all right, take us inside the Harris campaign. You cover the Harris campaign. Does it have a sense that Trump has the upper hand? What's its strategy for this closing stretch of the campaign?
So there's 2 very different strategies taking place here, the way that the Harris campaign sees it. With Donald Trump, they see him having a ceiling of support, and they feel like he is reaching that ceiling. With her, the vice president, her ceiling isn't as well known because she hasn't been in the race for very long. But if you pay attention to just what she had in terms of support coming out of Joe Biden dropping out of the race, and there was all that enthusiasm for her, even though it's been within a point or 2 points, you did see those subtle shifts in the battleground states her way. You were seeing in the Real Clear Politics average that she was up in the battleground states. So certainly she could get back to that support and enthusiasm level among voters. They feel like he's out there at his rallies trying to really fire up his base and turn them out, while they're still in persuasion mode. They're still introducing her to people, which, when you're only a couple weeks out from the election, still trying to persuade people to vote for you and tell them who you are is, to your point, maybe not where you want to be, but that is exactly where they are. So at this point, she's trying what I call an all-of-the-above approach, which is reaching out to disaffected Republicans, trying to get those independents. You saw her just within the same set of days talk to blackmail voters, as well as do a manufacturing event today and talk to laborers. So anything and anywhere that they think that she can do. And I don't think it's a throw it at the wall and see what sticks, because it is really targeted and very intentional, but certainly they're trying to create a scenario so when they get to the end of the election, it does not feel like, well, what if we had done this, or what if we had just done that?
So Vivian, contrast that to the Trump campaign. I mean, you've given us a little bit of sense of how they're thinking about things, but there's a clear strategy there about adding to the coalition at the same time they're revving up the base. How does that contrast to the way that Trump is?
So all along, since even before Kamala Harris entered the race as the presidential nominee, the Trump campaign maintained that she would probably get a bump in the polls, partly due to the enthusiasm of the party, but that they kept on calling it a honeymoon, that eventually it would even out. And to an extent, we have seen that, and they point to that very heavily. They also believe that some of the groups that they were really targeting, they had made a lot of advances, particularly with black men, as compared to previous cycles, not as compared to Democrats. But Donald Trump is doing better this time around than he has in previous cycles with black men. They felt like they still were able to maintain a lot of those voters. A lot of black women peeled off and threw their support behind Harris when she became the presidential nominee. But black men, they believe a large number that were supporting them before she was the nominee, they still stayed with Trump because of his economic message. And that's where they draw the big contrast. They say because of the economic message and because of his hammering on immigration in particular, they have maintained their base, but also managed to expand that base. The economy is the biggest issue they believe that has enabled them to expand that base.
What's really remarkable about that is that it's a strategy that relies on people ignoring Donald Trump and his inability to communicate even basic information.
Right.
Republicans, I mean, their success on one level is remarkable because, here we are and it's a dead even election and they're, polling strong on issues like the economy. On the other hand, Donald Trump appeared before the Chicago Economic Club this week. He couldn't utter a coherent expression of what his policy would be. He has, as you know, offered an economic platform that economists, nonpartisan economists have said would add significantly to the deficit. He's talking about tariffs. He just throws numbers out there. He said, tariffs of as high as 1,000%. Mm-hmm. When he's asked basic questions, he starts to talk about, sunbathing on the beach and, electric boats and things like that. And yet somehow this is translated through our political language into, his economic policy. It's a remarkable feat. It tells you about American politics right now.
Totally.
That so much of the country is willing to vote for somebody whose policy is basically, I'm better than the other person.
A lot of it is also used through enticing slogans. So as, the Wall Street Journal's tax reporter calls it, he calls it the no tax on something policy that Donald Trump has, where he said no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime. And it's very enticing for voters to hear. What they don't realize is how much it could drive up the deficit. And so the national debt. And so it is a big problem that Donald Trump has not yet been able to explain, but he goes out with the enticing slogans and people really rally
So now
behind
Vice President Harris has taken at her rallies more recently to start playing clips of Donald Trump and what he's been saying out there to try and bring attention to some of the things that he said. But when it comes to her economic policies, of course, Democrats are making the argument that she's putting forward plans of what she would do. The voters that we've been talking to, it's just not connecting with them directly.
Yeah, I want to play a clip. One of the things that she's done in this past week is for the first time make an avowed break with the current occupant of the White House. I want to listen to what she said to Brett Baer.
Let me be very clear. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. And like every new president that comes into office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and new ideas.
Is that too little, too late?
Well, she actually went a little bit further than that in an NBC interview today with Peter Alexander, and he asked her about Biden essentially giving her permission structure to say that she'd do something different than him, and she didn't want to criticize the president. She said she didn't think it would be productive for their relationship, but she did go on to say that her expansion of Medicare to include home health and to talk about her first-time home buyer credit were things that she would do differently. So she is inching towards that, but repeatedly she has declined to say what she would do differently from Biden. But what I was referring to before in terms of it just not connecting with people is that voters have been saying that they just don't understand how her economic policies will help them personally. When she goes out there and she talks about all the tax breaks and tax credits and talks at it more the 30,000 foot level, that isn't always connecting with someone who might have diabetes directly and know how she wants to cap the cost of insulin and how that would help them.
Yeah.
And we've heard from voters that they feel that in their communities, they need to hear more directly from her how it would make their lives better.
So, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think that, of course, the difference between Biden and Harris on home health care is not significant in the sense that, like, Biden's not going to disagree with her saying, oh, no, I don't think you should do that. He might not have opposed it himself, but he's not, ideologically against it. So it's not really making a huge break from Biden to say, I'm going to do something he didn't do. What people are looking for when they talk about a break from Biden is particularly what would her position be on Israel and the Middle East. And of course, we had the killing this week of Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, and what Biden quickly said was, let's use that as a way to wrap up the war. Israel, you won, declare victory, and let's get out of this. And what a lot of people on the left, not just Arab Americans, but also younger voters, want to hear from Kamala Harris that she's going to do something different than Joe Biden, because they've been upset with Joe Biden for being too pro-Israel. But she's walking a tight line because she can't break with Biden on that without losing, or at least risking losing, people who are more pro-Israel. She's going to get hit from both sides. She's literally getting hit from both sides by the same organization in Pennsylvania. It's putting out ads saying to the Jewish Americans, she's really not for you, and to Muslim Americans saying she's really for Israel. And they're trying to play it both ways.
And by the way, that's from Elon Musk. And that's another factor, that I think has become very apparent in the late stages of this campaign. The fusion between Donald Trump and the world's richest man is, even though we've seen, the influence of money in politics for, forever in our politics, the amounts of money in Watergate paled in comparison to what we're talking about today is an extraordinary fusion between Donald Trump and a small handful of the wealthiest people in the world. The spectacle of Musk actually on stage campaigning for Trump, remarkable one, I think.
Yeah, well, this takes us back to the democracy question, of course. And as you said earlier, the weird critique of Trump has kind of lost steam, and Kamala Harris is returning back to this democracy argument, which she'd abandoned in the first place because it wasn't effective. And so, Vivian, is there any reason to believe that the democracy argument is going to catch now?
I mean, I think Susan started the conversation by saying that people know who, or maybe it was Peter, sorry, that said everyone knows who Donald Trump is at this point. And I don't think it's going to necessarily sway people in the final 2 weeks. The Harris campaign would like to remind people, particularly with January 6 images and sort of the mayhem that could be attached to a Trump presidency. But at this point, I mean, Trump has also pushed back on that narrative so hard. He's called them freedom-loving patriots and has really defended a lot of the people that have gone out there who took very violent actions in the Capitol that day. And so it's hard to imagine it swaying anyone at the last minute. There could be some undecided voters who are swayed at the last minute if something kind of clicks, if they're at the polling station and see his name in front of them.
But it's worth. I want to play.
Decided.
I want to play some of the footage of Trump talking about the threat within, because I think it's worth hearing it from his own words.
I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within. And we have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military.
Susan, you and Peter wrote an excellent book about Donald Trump. Is that Donald Trump different than the guy who left the White House?
That Donald Trump is a man who spent the entire last year of his presidency trying to use the military against American people in the streets, exercising their First Amendment rights. Where Donald Trump has escalated the rhetoric, and by the way, he's often used the language of pure dictatorship when he has called his enemies vermin, enemies of the people. This is the language, that is resonant to anyone who's studied, Russian history. It comes straight from the Soviet past. But where he's escalated, Frank, I think is he wanted to use the American military in the summer of 2020. He was constrained by his own attorney general, his own defense secretary, his own chairman of the Joint Chiefs. First of all, he's not going to have those kind of people around him in a second term. And second of all, he's now outright saying if you disagree with him in the election, that's what he wants to call the military out for now. That's really a chilling thought.
Francesca, when Kamala Harris this week for the first time used the fascist label to describe, do you have any sense of what her thinking was when she made that term?
I think Peter, you were touching on a really important point about this when it comes to the couch sitters and trying to get them out. It's not just the folks who voted for Joe Biden in 2020. There's this whole other subset of people who maybe voted for Donald Trump in 2020 who were thinking about sitting this election out because maybe they don't want to bring themselves to vote for a Democrat in the election, but they also can't vote for Kamala Harris. And so a lot of this is aimed at trying to get those folks up off the couch and out to the polls. It's those disaffected Republicans. It's the independents. We saw her this week campaign with Adam Kinzinger. She's been doing events with Liz Cheney as well, former members of the Bush administration, the Romney campaign. That at this point seems to be a big part of how they think they could expand their electorate, is to get the anti-Trump Republicans to vote for her. Now, to your point, is that really going to work? Are they really going to be able to turn all these Nikki Haley voters in Pennsylvania and all these other places out to vote for her? It wasn't working for Joe Biden. Perhaps they think that it was the messenger and not the message that was the problem.
Nikki Haley herself has endorsed him at this point, so.
Right, and a number of those, and as I've written about, a number of those even national security type Republicans have said that they're not voting for Kamala Harris in this election.